Would I choose this route if I were to do this all over again? In this video, I'll delve into the intricacies of my paycheck as a resident physician. I'll also be shedding some light into how much I make, as well as the challenges. This was a bit cringe to do because I'm putting myself out there and also just putting all my business out there. Okay, so for those of you that are unaware, a resident physician is a physician that has completed all 4 years of medical school and is currently completing additional clinical training in order to practice independently. Residency typically lasts between 3 to 7 years, give or take. After your residency training, then you can either become a fellow, which means additional training in a subspecialty of interest, or you can become an attending physician. And that's when you're allowed to practice on your own independently without any additional supervision. Okay, so some story time. Ever wonder how the term resident physician actually came about? Well, I just learned this actually not too long ago. So apparently back in the day when the whole system of how medical training should be done was first institutionalized, the residents back then were spending crazy amount of hours in the hospital that they practically lived in the hospital, and thus they were termed residents of the hospital. And that term and name just carried on throughout the years. Till this day, residents still work a crazy amount of hours and thus they're called residents. But that's how steep that learning curve happens after medical school, because you just learn by doing. Everything sort of changed in 1984 when a young girl named Libby Zion walked into an emergency room in New York City and unfortunately passed away 8 hours later under the care of what her father believed to be overworked residents and interns. And thus, after that, the state of New York issued a limit on the number of hours physicians could work, and this ultimately spread nationwide. And since then, they've mandated the Libby Zion Law, which practically states that physicians can't work any more than 80 hours in a week on average over a 4-week span. And also, the maximum length of time you can go in a row is 28 hours, and you need at least a 10-hour break before your next shift. So most residents work about 80 hours a week while inpatient over the span of a 4-week period. Some weeks you work more, some other weeks you work less, but that's like an average. Now this varies by rotation or by program, and it just depends. It varies, but we'll just use the 80-hour work week when going over the paycheck. There's been a lot of debate in how much residents get paid in regards to the amount of work that they do. In the US, residency is actually funded by the government, and it's funded via Medicare. Unfortunately, residency pay isn't as lucrative as most people think. Most people think residents are balling like attendant physicians or the typical physician you see on the news, but unfortunately, that just isn't the case. The average pay for a resident is about 51 to 64,000 US dollars. Now, and I know that sounds like a lot of money, but when you break it down by the amount of hours that they work, it's actually not that much, especially considering the amount of student loans that most residents graduate with. But we'll talk about that later. Now, with the pay, some programs pay higher, some pay lower. It just varies. The programs that typically pay higher are typically in the metropolitan area, just because the cost of living is typically higher in those areas. So they tend to pay higher to kind of compensate the higher cost of living. Whereas those that pay lower, you typically find them in the more rural places, the places where the cost of living isn't as high. That's just like a general rule. It doesn't apply to everywhere. Something else to also keep in mind is that the salary paid by a specific program is the same regardless of what specialty you're in. So a family medicine first year resident in a program will be earning the exact same as a first year surgery resident. Doesn't matter what specialty you're in, whatever the program has set to be their pay for first year stays the same. But with every step up in year, you tend to earn a little bit more. So as you go from a first year resident to a second year resident, your pay increases a little bit. And as you go from a second year resident to a third year resident, your pay also increases slightly. All right, so for the moment you've all been waiting for, time to dive into my own payment. So obviously I'm a first year resident, and as you can see on the screen here, you can kind of see how much my program pays. So as you can see, first year residents, regardless of what specialty you're in, make about 69,869 US dollars. And as you graduate your first year and go into your second year, that pay increases to 72,536, and so forth and so on. So for my own personal paycheck, obviously I've blurred out a lot of personal information. And as you can see over here, over the span of 2 weeks, I got paid 2,600, just over 2,600 gross. But then the take home was just around 1,900. And in there, you can see that I've worked a total of 80 hours, and you can see all the deductions that led to that 2,600 ending up being 1,900. Things like federal tax come in play, Medicare, unemployment insurance, the city tax, as well as the state tax. And after they take all those out, you take home a whooping $1,900. Okay, so let's do some quick math. 80 hours per week, so 80 times 2, 160. So 2,600 divided by 160, that gives you a whooping $16.25 per hour. So with that said, I'm definitely still going to be relying on cereal and ramen for the next couple years. Just kidding. Am I though? Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. But all jokes aside, I'm actually quite grateful to be getting a pay. Going through 4 years of medical school without a pay, actually the other way around, I was paying. It's just nice to finally be paid and also just have some income coming in. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough to put some money aside and save. So it's not glamorous. It's not what most people think when they think of like a physician's paycheck. Anyone who's coming into medicine knows that it's a process of delayed gratification. You have to put in the grind, put in the work for the first couple years, and hopefully that pays off later on. But it is a long grind, and I'm currently still in the midst of the grind. But anyways, transitioning into some of the challenges that come with this limited pay, there are a couple of things to kind of highlight. The first one is, as I hinted earlier, my budget's still very limited, so I'm still forced to live somewhat like a student, even though I've attained one of the highest degrees in academia, which is a doctorate in medicine. So that's one of the challenges that come with that. You've put in all these work over the past 12, 13 years from graduating high school to get to this point, and you still kind of have to live like a student for it to be sustainable. The second challenge is, because I have to work these long hours for a prolonged amount of time, any vacation time you get, it tends to be a bit extravagant. You just want to forget about the long, drearing work you've done for the past couple weeks or months. So you tend to be a little bit more extravagant for your vacation and spend money that you typically wouldn't have if you weren't so busy and tense working. So it tends to kind of offset some of those earnings that you've had. You could argue that, could you be more disciplined? Yes, but life is all about balance, man. Number 3, which is a very, very important challenge, the dreaded student loan. My stress level just kicked up thinking of student loan. Anyways, the average medical student will graduate with about 200 to 250,000 US dollars in student loans, and that's an accumulation of undergraduate degrees if they did a master's or a PhD before medical school, as well as medical student loans. So for me, for example, my tuition in medical school was over $300,000. Not just the $300,000 for the tuition, but you also have to live, and you also have to pay for rent, and you have to pay for food, and you have to pay for textbooks, and you have to pay for exam preps, and you have to pay for the exams themselves. So all these piled up over the 4 years. So the loans kept piling up, and it's horrible because right now you're not earning a crazy amount, but at the same time you also have to be paying off those loans because they're accumulating interest. And that kind of leads into the 4th challenge, which is the loss of compound savings. So a lot of people my age or even younger have been earning better pay, or maybe let's say the same amount of pay from a younger age. They've been saving more, and over time that amount of money compounds and grows. Whereas in my case, not only was I not saving a compounding profit, but if anything, I'm doing the opposite, which is paying into a compounding interest from the student loans and other forms of borrowed money to help get to this point. So that's the fourth challenge that comes with not earning as much. Anyways, with all that said and all jokes aside, would I do this again? Of course I would, 1000%. I would go through this exact same path and this exact same journey again. Was I aware of all of the challenges I mentioned earlier before I decided to pursue medical school? Yes, I was. No one forced me to go into medical school. I made the decision out of my own will. If anything, I sacrificed so much and worked so hard to get to where I am, being fully aware of the difficulties and the delayed gratification and the challenges ahead. But the reason for that is because I truly don't see myself doing anything else other than what I'm doing right now. So would I do this all over again? 100% yes, without a doubt. And I truly do believe that eventually everything would pay off. Despite the long hours and the steep learning curve during residency, I find that learning and helping people and also practicing medicine is where I'm happiest. Would I choose this route if I were to do this all over again? And many times than not, the answer has always been yes. So I am truly fortunate to be in the position that I am. With that, I just want to lay this out there. If there's anyone out there who's looking for any kind of mentorship or anyone to speak to, or any kind of guidance, if you're thinking about going the same route or you know someone who wants to go through the same route, feel free to just leave a comment below or shoot me an email. You can find my email in the description on my page, and also feel free to check out other videos. Anyways, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you. See you all on the next video.